Okay. I'm Twyla. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I'm in recovery for codependency and chemical dependency. I am a single mom of 12 children, 6 still living at home, 6 living grandkids, and this is the story of my recovery of my life. My life verse is Isaiah 42:16. It says, I will bring the blind by a way they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make the darkness light before them and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them and not forsake them. I took this promise to heart, and ironically, my life has played out like this verse. My life before recovery was insanity. I was judgmental, angry, bitter, and very depressed. I was born in Salinas, California as an Army brat. I grew up in Tracy and Manteca, California in a normal, dysfunctional family. My family was the typical family of the 80s and 90s. My dad worked, my mom stayed at home. I was homeschooled from halfway through first grade until I graduated high school. I grew up with a younger brother and a younger sister. My mom and sister and I were heavily involved in gymnastics, while my dad and brother were doing karate and hunting and fishing. I accepted Jesus as my Savior when I was 11. We moved from Tracy to Manteca right before I turned 13, and my brother got heavily involved in the Police Explorer program. My sister was involved in soccer and softball. I was a candy striper and did ballet. At 15, I started babysitting more, cleaning houses for a living, and teaching ballet. My mom had my next sister when I was 15 and a half. During that year, when I was 16, there were a lot of things going on that affected my mental health, and I began eating for comfort. I gained quite a bit of weight. I felt like I had no friends. Then in June of '96, I got very sick. I lost a bunch of weight and was unable to eat for a few months. I had become very depressed at that time and became suicidal. I took a bottle of pills to end it all. Thankfully, I took something you can't overdose on, so I woke up the next morning. In August, right before I turned 17, I turned my life back over to the Lord and started trying to do the right things and the godly things. I graduated high school at 16, graduated vocational college at 17, started my internship for college at 18, met my ex the day before my 18th birthday, and married him 9 weeks later. I do not recommend it. I did not know him, and I did not know what I was getting into. Immediately after getting married, the abuse and control started. I didn't leave because I had become trauma bonded and was told if I left, he'd kill me, or worse, take my kids and leave the country. My ex got very involved in electronic gold, made a lot of money, and moved us to Oklahoma. We bought thousands of acres of land, had a Black Angus cattle ranch, houses galore, animals, four-wheelers, pool tables, theater rooms, so the works. I had a baby pretty much every other year, and we had everything money-wise, but I was miserable, I was angry, and I was living in fear. My ex has issues with pain pills and alcohol, and the abuse never stopped, but it became less physical and more verbal, emotional, and I had become more angry and more bitter. In the midst of all of this, I had joined a very legalistic, extremely conservative church, which I now realize was a cult, in the hopes that it would provide the peace I was desperately looking for. But following all the rules, being in church every time the doors were open, serving in the choir, reading my Bible, praying, teaching Sunday school classes, working the nursery, playing the piano, doing all the seminars and Bible studies did not help my life because it was making things worse. I thought these things would help me control my life, but I was more out of control than ever because nothing was getting better. In trying to maintain that control with my children, I read every book from my church's arsenal. I was told I needed to break their will. I required immediate, respectful, joyful, complete obedience. I'm ashamed to say that I followed their instructions, and I was mean, harsh, and at times abusive to my children who are up there. That wasn't my desire. I didn't know how to deal with the abuse I was going through. I didn't know how to process or control my emotions, which meant I was not able to help my children learn to process or control their emotions. We moved back to California in 2011, and in June of 2015, I found out that my ex was sexually assaulting several of our daughters. CPS substantiated charges in what should have been an open and shut case turned into a nightmare for me. Court orders were ignored and not enforced. Child support was never paid. I was evicted because of it. For a year and a half, my kids and I bounced around from a tiny rental to a homeless shelter to a motel in Escalon for 2.5 months, and I finally got a house to rent in January 2017. I had switched churches and become the secretary of my new church and school that year. I worked 70 to 90-hour work weeks, sometimes taking my work home with me. I was not just a secretary for the church. I was a secretary for the pastor, the assistant pastor, the school principal. I was the yard duty, the lunch supervisor. I helped the younger kids learn all their scriptures. I taught first grade, and I was the girls' assistant coach one year and the coach the next year for volleyball. My kids were in the Earning for Learning program for school, which meant that every day after school, I would take a group of kids to sit in front of a store and sell things like chocolate bars, jerky sticks, Jamba Juice cards, etc. The profits paid for their schooling. In all of this, I was still angry, still bitter, but I pushed ahead and did what I could to try and make a better life for myself and my kids. I was alone and lonely, though, and in June of 2018, I met a guy at a church. He was a graduate of the church's addiction ministry program. It was, of course, a whirlwind of love bombing that I didn't see because I was so lonely that it felt amazing to think that someone really loved me. He said he was going to be my forever. I found out I was pregnant in October, and both of our divorces were finalized, so we got married in January of 2019. I hid my pregnancy in order to keep my job, and keep stability in my kids' lives. At least that was the intention. Didn't play out exactly like that. In fact, that was the start of the year that would completely destroy me. In February, my sister took a bottle of Tylenol and called me and asked me what else to take. My family lives in Idaho, so there was nothing I could do. Thankfully, she got my sister and listened to me, who was the only other person in the house, and I had time. I had time to tell her she took the bottle of Tylenol, get her to the hospital now. And the phone went silent. I dropped to the floor crying from the fear of losing my sister. My ex opened the door, looked at me, shook his head, and closed the door. He couldn't handle my emotions. My parents flew me up to Idaho to see my sister, and miraculously, she survived with no damage to her liver whatsoever. While I was in Idaho, though, my husband Chris started drinking. When I came back, it was very bad. A few weeks later, 2 of my girls were in a screaming match, and he screamed at them to shut up and kicked a laundry basket across the room. Then he left. I was devastated and scared to lose the man who I thought was my forever, but he went out and got meth and got high. He came back the next day, and we agreed to work on things, then he would get help. He didn't. He struggled with relapse and sobriety. I found out my son and his girlfriend were expecting and due in October. They got married in June. I gave birth July 2nd with a barely clean husband. A week after Cassidy was born, my husband had to go to court for a probation thing and ended up having to spend 30 days in jail. July 16th, I got a text in the middle of the night from my son saying her water broke. She wasn't due till October. I went and got 2 of my girls up to take to the hospital with me to help with Cassidy. She was only 2 weeks old. I left the other kids asleep with my oldest daughter, and we went to the hospital in Turlock, where we were told by the doctor that there was nothing that they could do, and that because he was only 23 weeks, 6 days, for 24 hours, they would not do anything. And they refused to transfer her. They gave her Pitocin and gave her an epidural so she could rest, and she went to sleep. I went out to the car to feed Cassidy. As I was finishing up, I got a text that said, "He's here." I had so much hope in that moment. I ran as fast as I could. But when I walked in the door, he was laying on the baby warmer. I lost faith in that moment. Every single bit of it, had none left. The nurse wrapped him up to hand him to me, to hand him to my son and my daughter-in-law. I don't know how I got through that day or the rest of the days that followed, but my heart broke and I was destroyed. I've still not recovered entirely. My husband had come home August 7th, and I found out later that month he was talking to an ex about leaving me, and I was devastated. And 2 of my girls decided they wanted to go live with their grandma. I didn't want them to, but I was told by family and friends and the pastor, who was the ultimate authority in our lives at the time, to let them go. They left the first week of September, and I was struggling with severe postpartum depression. I was shutting down emotionally, but I was still trying. Then I found out that my mom had breast cancer, and that was the final straw. I was done. I wanted to die. I didn't want to do this anymore. So on October 6, 2019, my husband and I were in a text fight, and he told me when I got home, you're going to take a hit of meth. And I said, no, I'm not. We went back and forth, but when I got home, I just did not care anymore. So I did it. I took a few hits off the pipe, and I felt much better. I felt almost normal. I felt like I could control my emotions better. I felt like I had energy. I could think clearly. I didn't realize it at the time. I have ADHD, so I was self-medicating. That's why I felt good, and that's why I felt normal. I wasn't addicted yet, but I liked the way I felt. During all of this, I had only had a couple of people from church check on me, mainly the pastor and his wife, unless I vague posted on Facebook. I felt alone and abandoned and unloved. Around December, a lady from a mom's group I was in on Facebook started messaging me, just saying hello, telling me she loved me and cared about me, wanted to check up on me. So many times she would text, and I would be using and busy, and I would get so annoyed, and I did not want to answer her. Other times, I was wanting to die, and she would text me out of the blue, just to tell me that she loved me. She knew what I was doing, but she never stopped reaching out. Over the next year, Jennifer was the only person to consistently reach out to me. She never gave up on me. She never stopped loving me. And her love was what my heart needed. She has become like a sister, and I will be forever grateful for God putting her in my life. Not sure the exact date, but sometime mid-December, my husband decided he was going to shoot meth and asked me if I wanted him to hit me. Up to that point, I had felt nothing when smoking it. I figured if it was helping me to smoke it, that would help more, right? Up to that point, I felt nothing, but as soon as it hit my veins, I felt it. And I said out loud, this is what I was looking for. I was hooked. From that point until I got clean, I didn't want to use in any other way. I went hard and fast, unaware that my ex was slowly giving me more to see how much I could tolerate. So I spent the next 2 years living in the worst insanity of the meth world and all that comes with that. We had tried to quit a few times, but never made it even to 90 days until the summer of 2020. We went to Idaho to see my mom, thinking that she didn't have much time left. We used on our way there, and my sister called the cops on us. I don't know how, but they didn't find anything to use to arrest us. We came home. My sister called the cops on us again. I was so angry, but the truth was I really did want help. I had secretly hoped when we were in Idaho to have a conversation with my sister where I could admit what I was doing so she could help me, but that had never happened. And she had no experience with addiction, so she didn't know what else to do. 2 weeks later, CPS was called on us. They showed up at my house on a Friday afternoon when we weren't home. When we got home around 4, I called the number on the card, and the worker said she would come Monday morning. We decided we would use this to get ourselves clean, so we went out and picked up some meth so we could use it to clean the house. We used well into Saturday, and we did end up getting the house clean, and the CPS worker came Monday morning, and she required a drug test. Meth stays in your system at least 3 days, but can be longer depending on use. And we both tested negative. It should not be possible, but it is. I know that if I would have tested positive, I would have lost my children, and at that point, that would have been the last thing that I would have experienced. I'm sorry, my pages are mixed up. We did use it as the catalyst to get clean, and I got my kids in school. We cleaned up our property, and we started doing normal life stuff. January 1st, we relapsed again. From then until May, we used, but sporadically. In May, our friend Will came to stay with us, and in a conversation with my husband, he had said he wanted to quit, but Will and I did not. I was very angry at God, and I wanted nothing to do with him. I just wanted to keep not feeling. I cannot tell you how many times I would just go out in my driveway, sit on the ground, and just scream. I had no words. I was just hurting so very badly. Will changed his mind in June and left to go back to rehab. We continued to use until the end of June. I used until July 2nd, 2021. But I realized I didn't want to use anymore, but I also didn't want to quit. My husband at the time wanted to go to church, and I knew it would be good for the kids, so I went. I didn't want to be there, and I cried through every service for over a month. But God was speaking to me through the messages and the people, and slowly I started to listen. I was still angry, but I was starting to soften. During this time, Will became my support person. He was the only other person who knew about my addiction, and with all the chaos in my life, I didn't know what I was doing. He was always there to encourage me, pray for me, and call me out on my crap. Sorry, this is... Really sorry. I should have checked this first. Really embarrassing. I am so sorry. I thought I had it all in order. He called me out on my crap. There we go. He became like a brother to me, and he's still one of my best friends today. I lapsed in September for a few days, but I got right back up, and I tried again. In October, our friend Vincent came to live with us. We were all in recovery, and we all became very close. My husband kept drinking. In December, he was out of control with his drinking, and he attacked me. He went to jail. And he was angry because I hadn't finished Christmas shopping for the kids. And when I was giving this statement to the police, they asked if they could bring presents for my kids. My church at the time brought the rest of the presents and brought us food and took care of us. Vincent and his friend came over Christmas Eve and helped me set up their gifts and put together their basketball hoop. And they ended up having an amazing Christmas. I lapsed again 2 days after New Year's. But I got back up and I kept trying. Chris got out of jail, and he was on a spiritual high. Sorry. Really sorry. I became hopeful because he was so good. We started getting marriage counseling from our pastor, and our pastor asked me to go to CR for codependency. I knew that I wasn't codependent, but I went anyways. February 1st, 2022 was my first time at CR. I came with my friend Vincent, and we sat way over there in the dark. I went to the first timers group, and Debbie and Scott were leading it. I instantly felt a connection with Debbie, and she has become a huge part of my recovery. On my third time at CR, I decided to try the chemical dependency group, and I found my people. My husband started working at the same place as our friend Vincent, but unfortunately, once the spiritual high faded and life went back to normal, he relapsed on alcohol again. In March, he started using meth again while at work, and I was so angry and hurt that I wanted to hurt him back, so I used again for a couple days. I got back up and started trying again. I was going to a book study at my church on the book Gentle and Lowly. The book was eye-opening and was instrumental in healing my relationship with God. I was going to church, I was going to CR, I was going to Bible studies, but I was still struggling and still angry. By mid-April, my husband was out of control and is drinking again. Our friend Will, who was in rehab in Indiana, and our pastor helped him to get out to the rehab in Indiana. The morning he was supposed to leave, he was so drunk he couldn't even sit upright, so me and my friend, decided to give him some meth to sober him up so he could get on the plane. My pastor and Chris and our friend left and took him to the airport. I went in the room and used the rest of the meth. I so wanted to be done, but I wasn't. I used for a couple of days and then got back up and started trying again. After that, Vincent stayed with me to help me. We had become very close over the 9 months he had lived with us, and he and Will and I are all a very close friend group, and they were the only two who knew about my addiction, so I leaned on them for help. Vincent decided to get clean too, and we promised to do it together. He will have 2 years in 2 weeks, and he continues. He continues to be my brother, my best friend, and my support. I returned to CR after Chris left, and when I was going to leave, I went to turn on my car, and it roared to life. It's not supposed to roar, so I knew there was something wrong, and I opened the hood trying to see if I could find out where it was coming from. There was a gentleman parked next to me, and he got out of his car to see if he could help, and we discovered that someone had dropped my catalytic converter while I was inside. I just was on the ground sobbing and crying and thinking, why does everything have to go wrong for me? But in that moment, that gentleman prayed for me, and another lady came up and prayed for me and comforted me. And in that moment, that was exactly what I needed, to feel God's love through their love and to feel cared for. A step study started, and I went to the first meeting. The second meeting, I was on my way out, and it had been a struggle to get out of the house. I was taking my ex's pickup, and as I started driving down the road, I started smelling gas. Really, really strong. So I turned down a side street and parked. Tried to Google it and figure out if it was safe to drive. Google results made me think it was okay, so I got back on the road. As I got to the entrance of the freeway, though, I had this overwhelming feeling of dread, like a warning to not get on that freeway. But as I got to the entrance, I kept going. So I kept going straight and started talking out loud to God. I don't pray out loud. It makes me very uncomfortable. I don't like it, I don't do it. But I was angry, and God was going to hear about it. I told him all about how I am trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to go to a step study to learn about you and learn how to fix my life, so why can't I go? Why are you stopping me from going? I don't understand. It was not audible, but God spoke and said, just wait. So I said, wait on what? I need to do a step study. I need to fix myself. What am I supposed to do? Again, he said, just wait. And for the third time, I said, wait for what? What am I supposed to do? And he said, just wait. I was turning the corner in my street, and I yelled at him, fine, I'll wait. I waited. Chris did well for a little while in rehab, and in June, my kids all left for the summer to go back to their fathers for summer visitation, and I was alone. I used for 2 days. I was so embarrassed to come back to CR again after every lapse, but I had done it again. 2 weeks later, I did it for the last time. July 2nd, 2022. Using IV meth is really damaging to your heart. When I would use, my heart would race and slow down, and it would freak me out. I would use a stethoscope to listen to my heart and a heart rate monitor on my phone to watch my heart rate. It would shoot up, and it would slow down, at times stopping completely. The last time I used meth, I sat for 24 hours with a stethoscope in my ears and my phone on my finger, just watching and listening to my heart, scared every time it stopped, it would not start again. At one point, I was so freaked out, I called my friend who came and sat with me while I came down. I was finally ready to be done. I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to live this life anymore. I didn't want to be scared I was going to die anymore. I didn't want to deal with the weeks of recovery afterwards, and I didn't want to be embarrassed and ashamed anymore. I was done. That day was July 2nd, 2022, and I have been completely clean since that day. Wouldn't it be nice if that's where the story ended? Happily ever after. Unfortunately, life is not a fairy tale, and I came back to CR and started to get really serious about my recovery. I got a temporary sponsor for the summer, and around this time, my sister Soraya had reached out, and we reconnected. Soraya is my closest sibling relationship. She is my twin, who is 18 years younger than me, but we are so much closer than just sisters. Losing that relationship with her when I did was devastating because we were so close. Gaining it back and becoming closer is a huge blessing that I did not think would happen, but God. She was the only person in my family who I have told about my addiction till today. She has been my lifeline so many times. When I was sure I couldn't get through anything else, she was there for me. She was my sounding board and my person when I was freaking out and needed to vent. She always knows when I am struggling and will call, and she is always there for me. I will be eternally thankful for God bringing her back into my life. In July, Chris started drinking heavily again while in rehab, and he became very angry and mean and started lashing out at me. It was overwhelming to be treated the way he was treating me, all while trying to take care of myself in recovery and take care of my kids. In August, one of my daughters had to have urgent surgery to fix her intestines that had twisted. I went to San Francisco to stay with her in the hospital. I was terrified as I was driving over there, but the surgery went well. I stayed the rest of the day with her and then went back to her apartment around the corner when her husband came for the night. I spent the night, and in the morning I was walking back to the hospital, and as I was walking, I passed by two men passing a meth pipe. My first thought was, I have a couple dollars in my purse, I bet they'd let me have a hit. Followed immediately by, no, what in the world? I did not work this hard to mess up this soon, and I quickly got into the hospital as quickly as I could. Chris continued to drink excessively, harass me, and be mean, and then he used crack. Our marriage fell apart completely. I had known it was over in March, but I held out hope because I don't like to give up on people. There was a step study starting up in September, and I joined it. I remember walking in and meeting Nicole and thinking she was pretty and stylish, and I really wasn't worthy of friendship with these people, that I was less than. But God, Nicole has become one of my closest friends and my greatest encourager. And I have remained close with most of the women in my step class. We had the greatest time of sweet fellowship and encouragement while learning. I was in my step study and I was working my steps. I got an official sponsor, Kathy, who began to work through steps with me and pushed me to do better. She prayed for me and loved me, and I am so grateful that God allowed that time for her to teach me and pour his word into me. I began to take care of my physical health, and in November, Chris used meth and his behavior was becoming even more erratic. So by December, I had blocked him. I did unblock him, let him watch Cassidy open her Christmas presents, and then he was really great for all of January. I went to see him for 3 days in February, and while the trip was good, there were things that made it obvious they were not what they seemed. He was not doing as well as he acted, and I began to feel very sick on my trip. 2 days after coming home, I had a horrible pancreatitis attack, and I spent the next week knocked out on pain meds so that I wouldn't eat. And that's when things got really bad and finally ended with Chris. When he said the words, "You never have time for me because you're always too busy working your recovery," I realized it was over. I would never be able to stay clean with someone who wasn't going to stay clean themselves and who was going to treat me badly for bettering myself and my life. In May of last year, after months of my sponsor telling me to find meetings to go throughout the week, I was having a really bad day and I was struggling, and it wasn't a Tuesday. I knew I needed a meeting ASAP, so I texted my friend Carrie and asked her where to go. She met me a couple hours later at the Redwood Rooms for the 12 by 12 meeting, and I found more recovery family and a home group of amazing people who have helped me in my recovery. I now love going to meetings. I love the experience, strength, and hope I get from them. My first meeting that I was there, they read the 9th step promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them. Work. Thank you. Internally, I laughed and I shook my head, thinking that will never happen for me. But slowly over the last year, God has brought about that change. I now read it through and cry, and I'm amazed at how much has changed and how far I've come. I read it with joy, seeing how each promise has been fulfilled. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with thine heart, and lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." I never thought I'd get here. I didn't even think I'd make it to a year, but I did. Everyone said it'll get easier after a year. It did not. It got so much worse. By the end of August, I was spinning out emotionally and very depressed. At one point, I was at a meeting and I was driving home. I saw two guys on bikes and thought to myself, they probably have some meth, and I have cash. I wanted to stop. Instead, I got on my phone, texted a friend, told her what was going on, and asked if I could come over because I knew I wasn't safe. She said yes, and I went over. She let me vent and talked to me and kept me there until I felt safe to drive home. She saved me that night just by being there. Use your phone less. I realized early on how essential it is to address every aspect of your life in order to achieve true sobriety. There has to be a whole life change. And while doing one thing might help you and you might have success, I didn't want the possibility of failure. I wanted to do everything I could to fix and save myself. I now have a sponsor, a lead in AA. I have a sponsee. I go to meetings almost every day. I'm in service here and in AA. I chair a ladies' meeting Sunday afternoons. I work the bookstore here once a month. I'm on the schedule here to facilitate small groups, and I count everyone in here every week. I go to church. I do devotions. I pray. I also go to counseling. I have a psychiatrist. I have a caseworker and peer support. I'm doing EMDR therapy. And I'm continuing to try to fix my life in every way because recovery isn't just stopping using, it's changing your life so you have nothing to run from, nothing to numb, and no void to fill. There are so many in this room who have been a part of my recovery journey, people who I would not be here without. So many who have prayed and cried with me, people who have encouraged and supported me when I thought I could never do it. My heart is overwhelmed by the blessing of having the love and support of all these people. There are those that can't be here tonight, and to them and to those in this room, thank you for your love and support, encouragement, and prayers. To the newcomer, keep coming back. Don't give up no matter how many times you fall down. Allow God to work in your life. Get a phone list and use it. It can save your life. We are all here because we are messes, but God turns messes into messages. He turns victims into victors. He can take a life full of shame and darkness and bring you joy and peace that you could never imagine possible. One day at a time, one moment at a time, keep doing the next right thing, and remember, it's progress, not perfection. Together we can do this. And while sobriety is great, freedom is so much better. Don't give up. Again, Isaiah 42:16 says, "And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them and not forsake them." I was blind and I didn't know where I was going. God brought me here on paths I never would have imagined. My life has peace and light now. I sit in the light and CR now. My life path has been a mess of a path, but God has straightened it out. And in all that, he never forsook me. He never deserted me. He never gave up on me. I am standing here today with the life I have because God.
Thank you, Twyla. One of the truths you mentioned, Twyla, was that each one of us in here are messes in some way, shape, or form. And so that is the truth there, which is why each one of us in here is in desperate need of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so let us not forget that that's what we need. So, hey, let's thank Twyla one more time here tonight. Our focus question is if that testimony connected with you, or just if you want to share about your specific day for the night, feel free to share that as well. The second part would be, would you say the serenity prayer here with me? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever the next. Amen. If you are a first-timer, come and say hello through those doors. Second-timers, right up here.